Pack your desk. You embarrassed me last night. That was how the morning began. No greeting, no explanation. Just the CEO's wife standing in my office, informing me that my decade-long career now belonged to her mood. According to her, my crime was simple. I hadn't acknowledged her properly at a charity gala. I didn't stand. I didn't smile fast enough, in her version of events. That made me disrespectful and disposable. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Power like hers never does. She spoke slowly, confidently, as if the outcome had already been signed off somewhere important. "You ignored me," she said, eyes cold. People noticed. I won't tolerate that. I waited for human resources, for a manager, for someone to ask a question. No one came. I'm Evelyn Hart, for 10 years. I built the company's international division from a quiet side project into its most reliable revenue stream. I negotiated overseas partnerships, repaired broken relationships, and handled the work no one else wanted because it required patience instead of ego. I stayed out of internal politics. I let results speak. Apparently, results don't speak louder than wounded pride. She, on the other hand, held no title, no office, no responsibilities on paper. Yet everyone understood her authority. She didn't need a badge to make decisions. Being married to the CEO was enough. That unspoken hierarchy settled into the room like a bad smell. "This isn't up for discussion," she added, already turning away. My husband agrees. Of course he did. I felt something sharp settle in my chest, not panic, not fear, but the quiet insult of being erased without review, without process, without truth. Years reduced to a single accusation, delivered by someone who had never once asked what I did here. I gathered my things slowly, giving myself time to breathe, to think, to choose restraint over reaction. At the door, I stopped and turned back. "Before I go," I said evenly, "has anyone verified who prepared your international pitch?" She froze, and for the first time that morning, the silence belonged to me. How did that moment land with you? If it stirred something uncomfortable, try stepping outside later and noticing one small detail around you, a sound, a color, a passing face, just to reset your mood. Tell me where you're listening from right now. I read those more than you think. Stay with me and subscribe if you want the rest of this story, because what came next wasn't loud. But it changed everything. What she never saw was the work that happened before applause, before dinners, before anyone important decided they had an opinion, long before that accusation. I was the one quietly stitching together the company's foreign partnerships. I built relationships across borders that didn't trust each other yet. I learned how people negotiated when they weren't performing for an audience. I fixed cultural mistakes executives never even realized they made. While others chased visibility, I chased stability. Deals closed, contracts renewed. Revenue arrived quietly and kept arriving. No drama, no credit, exactly how I preferred it. That habit of staying invisible followed me into something else I never talked about. Outside my official role, I accepted a private consulting request under a different name. Discretion was mandatory. The client wanted guidance, coaching, and absolute silence. She paid well, demanded more, and made it clear she expected results without ever appearing dependent. I agreed. Not because I needed recognition, but because the work was clean and the rules were clear. She was obsessed with being taken seriously, not respected seen. She wanted to walk into rooms and feel eyes pause. She wanted people to believe she belonged there without question. Every session circled back to that hunger. When she struggled, she deflected. When corrected, she bristled. When praised, she softened. It wasn't competence she chased. It was insulation against embarrassment. I noticed the fear underneath quickly. The way she rehearsed phrases again and again. The way she asked whether they would notice if something went wrong. The way she spoke about being dismissed as decorative. It would have been easy to judge her. Instead, I stayed professional. I prepared materials carefully. I explained context she pretended to already understand. I never revealed who I was or where I worked. Ethics mattered to me. Confidentiality wasn't a suggestion. She treated me like a tool, useful, replaceable, necessary only until the moment she felt confident enough to stand alone. I endured it with a polite smile and a private sense of irony. After all, my actual job involved advising executives who never raised their voices because they didn't have to, compared to them. She was loud insecurity wrapped in elegance. What I didn't know, what she didn't know, was how close our worlds already were. The pieces connected slowly. A reference here, a name dropped there, a story about my husband's company told with too much familiarity. When the realization settled in, it didn't arrive as shock, it arrived as clarity. The special client, the woman desperate for legitimacy, the wife of the man who signed my performance reviews. I didn't confront her. I didn't cancel the work. I kept my promise and my silence, because professionalism isn't selective, and because part of me wanted to see just how far she would go, never imagining that the person she trusted in private would soon be the one she tried to erase in public. By then, I was living two professional lives and managing both with deliberate distance. With my client, the work became increasingly technical. I wrote full presentations, anticipated follow-up questions, and prepared branching responses for scenarios she might face. Every phrase was calibrated. Every pause was planned. I coached posture, tone, pacing, how to sound confident without understanding. She didn't learn the substance. She memorized the performance. When I tested her with slight variations, she froze. When I returned to the script, she relaxed. That told me everything. She wasn't building skill. She was building cover. I adjusted accordingly. I simplified where comprehension failed and reinforced repetition where illusion mattered more than mastery. She wanted certainty, not depth. She wanted to pass, not progress. I stopped correcting her misunderstandings unless they threatened collapse. Efficiency replaced idealism. Results replaced teaching. At the same time, I protected myself. Every session was documented. Notes, drafts, revisions stored cleanly, time-stamped, compliant with the platform's policies, not out of suspicion, but habit. When you work quietly behind other people's reputations, records are the only thing that don't forget. I never altered files after the fact. I never exaggerated. Precision mattered. Truth always does. She began speaking about the deal more openly then. A partnership overseas, a transformational opportunity. Numbers slipped out during moments of excitement, figures that didn't belong to casual conversation. Tens of millions. Multiple stakeholders. Public visibility. I listened without reacting, already mapping implications. That was when I understood the scale. This wasn't a vanity exercise. This was a transaction that could reshape the company's future, and she was positioned as its face, not because she was qualified, but because she wanted it badly enough to demand it, and because no one had challenged her yet. I kept my voice neutral, encouraging. Even, I delivered exactly what she asked for. Because control doesn't require confrontation. Sometimes it requires patience. What she never realized was that I wasn't just preparing her. I was preparing for the moment preparation would be tested. I knew who would be in the room. I knew how unscripted questions worked. I knew how quickly confidence collapses when the language changes without warning. And I knew something else. I knew that without my materials, without my structure, without my quiet corrections, the entire presentation would unravel in minutes. She didn't hold the expertise. She held a copy of it. I held the original. That knowledge didn't make me angry. It made me calm. Real leverage isn't loud. It's knowing exactly where the system depends on you and choosing when, or if, to remind it as the deal drew closer. I stayed composed, invisible, and precise, because when stakes rise, emotion clouds judgment. Control, on the other hand, sharpens it. James didn't look at me when he spoke. He folded his hands, cleared his throat, and chose words the way people do when they've already decided. Keeping peace at home, he said, mattered right now. The situation had become personal. He was sorry. He needed to let me go. He didn't say my work was lacking. He didn't say clients complained. He didn't mention the contracts I'd stabilized or the partners who trusted my name. He talked about stress, about balance, about how this would blow over. I listened without interrupting, feeling the room narrow around a conclusion that had nothing to do with performance. No one else joined the meeting. There was no human resources rep, no questions, no record beyond his voice and my silence. The message was simple: a family inconvenience outranked a decade of results. I nodded once. I thanked him for his time. The politeness surprised even me when anger finally arrived. It came quietly, like pressure building behind glass. I walked back to my office and packed methodically. Not hurried, not dramatic. Each item returned to its place as if I were closing a long, careful chapter. Colleagues passed by the doorway and looked away. Some knew. None intervened. Silence, I learned, is contagious. Before leaving, I opened my laptop and did the last thing my role had taught me to do: remove dependencies. Over the years, I'd become an informal bridge answering questions after hours, smoothing translations, flagging risks before they reached calendars. None of that lived in official job descriptions. It lived in relationships and shared trust. I ended it cleanly. Access lists updated, courtesy channels closed, drafts returned to neutral folders, ongoing notes archived with dates and sources intact. Nothing deleted, nothing sabotaged, just a careful withdrawal of unpaid labor that had quietly held things together. I sent a brief message to external partners explaining I was transitioning and that future inquiries should follow formal channels: professional, neutral, accurate. Then I logged out. At the door, James stood and said he hoped we could stay on good terms. I smiled and wished him luck. I meant it, in the way you wish luck to someone about to learn a lesson without a safety net. Outside, the day looked unchanged. Traffic moved, phones rang, meetings continued. That calm was deceptive. I knew what had been turned off, and I knew how long it would take to be noticed. I left without raising my voice. Because storms don't announce themselves. They arrive after the air goes still. I trusted the math of consequences and waited for absence to speak louder than explanations in time. If you think you understand, the next paragraph will change your mind. Waiting changed the texture of time. Each day before the meeting felt stretched thin, quiet enough to hear decisions settling. From the outside, preparations looked routine. Calendars filled, agendas circulated, slides polished. I watched from a distance, informed only by what drifted back through former colleagues and mutual contacts. The partners were confirmed, translators booked, questions preloaded. Everything looked orderly, which told me exactly how fragile it was. She felt the gap immediately, without my quiet prompts. Her confidence thinned. Messages went unanswered. Drafts stalled. Someone finally told her I was no longer available. Panic crept in sideways. She called once, then again, leaving a message that tried to sound casual and failed. When I returned the call, I kept my tone neutral and brief. I reminded her I no longer worked there. I wished her luck. I declined to elaborate. Control doesn't always mean acting. Sometimes it means refusing to be pulled back into someone else's urgency. As the date approached, I reviewed what I already knew. The investors valued flexibility. They tested alignment by shifting language mid-discussion. They asked follow-up questions to see who truly understood the mechanics. Scripts failed quickly in rooms like that. Experience did not. The night before the meeting, another call came, this time from an unfamiliar number. She spoke faster, skipping pleasantries, asking whether I could just listen in, just be on standby. I declined again. Silence followed. I imagined her recalculating, realizing the safety net was gone. Lesson leverage grows when you stop explaining your boundaries and let them hold. The morning arrived without ceremony. I went about my day, not watching feeds or waiting by the phone, when updates finally reached me. They were subtle at first: a delayed start, a pause for clarification, a question repeated, then rephrased. Then the shift happened. An investor asked something that wasn't on the page. Another followed, building on it. The conversation moved laterally, then deeper. That was the point where preparation ends and understanding begins. Reports said she hesitated, that she looked toward the end of the table, that no one answered for her. I didn't feel satisfaction, I felt confirmation. The countdown had never been to the meeting itself. It had been to the moment reality stopped cooperating with performance, and once that clock ran out, waiting was no longer required. I stayed patient. Knowing consequences travel quietly before they arrive loudly. Control meant trusting sequence, not spectacle, and letting systems reveal truths on their own schedule, without interference, anger, or commentary from me. The silence did the work I never could. By the time the meeting began, the atmosphere had shifted from confidence to calculation. I wasn't in the room, but I knew its rhythms well enough to picture the sequence greetings: polite smiles, scripted openings. She stood at the center, composed, rehearsed, and fragile beneath the polish. The first minutes went smoothly. Her prepared remarks landed as intended. Each line delivered exactly as practiced. Heads nodded, notes were taken. Then the questions started. Not aggressive, just curious. One partner asked for clarification on a logistics timeline. Another followed with a compliance detail. Simple questions, basic even. If you understood the work. She stalled. She repeated the question. She answered something adjacent. The room adjusted. Translators paused. Eyes lifted from paper to faces. The partners weren't confused. They were verifying. That was when the performance cracked. A third question came. This one conversational, unstructured. She glanced down, searching memory that wasn't there. Silence stretched. Someone filled it for her. Briefly, then stopped. No one rescued her again. The partners exchanged looks I'd seen before, the kind reserved for realizing expectations were misaligned. Recognition travels quickly among professionals. Once doubt appears, it multiplies. They shifted languages mid-sentence. They tested assumptions. She smiled, nodded, and answered too late. The deception didn't explode. It dissolved. Then something unexpected happened. One of the senior partners leaned forward and asked about a market adjustment I'd handled years earlier. He referenced a negotiation only a handful of people knew. He used my phrasing, almost verbatim. The room went still. He asked who had built the original framework. My name came up quietly. That changed the tone immediately. Questions redirected. Authority recalibrated. The partners weren't angry. They were disappointed. Which is worse. They had come prepared to invest, not to be misled by borrowed competence. I heard later that she tried to recover, explaining she led strategy while others handled execution. It didn't matter. The gap was visible now. Once seen, it couldn't be unseen. The meeting ended early, no shouting, no confrontation, just careful closure and restrained language. The partners thanked everyone and withdrew. Professionalism intact. Interest gone. I felt no triumph when I learned how it ended. Exposure isn't revenge when it's simply truth arriving on schedule. What unfolded wasn't dramatic. It was precise. The twist wasn't that she failed publicly. It was that the people who mattered recognized who had actually done the work all along. Without being told, their recognition didn't save my job that day, but it quietly rewrote the narrative she could no longer control from that moment forward without my help. If you leave here, you will miss the most important thing. The cancellation arrived without drama, which made it unmistakable. An email from the partners thanked the company for its time and stated they would not proceed under the proposed structure. No blame. No accusations. Just a closed door that could not be reopened with explanations. The deal was gone. And with it, the illusion that presentation could substitute for competence. What followed moved faster than anyone expected. Calendars shifted. Lawyers appeared. The board requested a briefing, then another. Facts replaced feelings. Timelines replaced excuses. I wasn't invited at first, but my name surfaced anyway, threaded through documents and questions that wouldn't stay quiet. Who built the framework? Who handled prior negotiations? Who approved the termination? By the end of the week, the story had reversed itself. My dismissal was no longer framed as unfortunate timing. It was labeled procedural failure. The absence of review, the lack of human resources, the reliance on a personal grievance were noted, logged, and compared against policy. The board asked for records. Records existed. That surprised no one who knew me. When they finally called, the tone was different, calm, formal, curious. I answered what I could without embellishment. I didn't accuse, I didn't argue. I stated what happened, when it happened, and what I did afterward. Justice doesn't require theatrics when evidence does the speaking. The twist came later. During a follow-up I didn't attend, the CEO was asked directly why a family member had influenced a personnel decision tied to a critical transaction. Not indirectly, not hypothetically, directly. Silence followed, the kind that lands heavier than denial. Governance has little patience for blurred lines. By then, satisfaction felt quieter than I expected. There was no vindication speech, no apology parade, just a system correcting itself, one question at a time. The board placed restrictions, oversight tightened, authority realigned, consequences attached themselves to choices without my involvement. I learned afterward that the CEO had struggled to explain how peace at home had outweighed fiduciary duty. That explanation didn't age well. Accountability rarely does. Walking away from that chapter, I felt something rare and steady. Not relief, not triumph. Assurance. When systems work, they don't need heroes. They need clarity. And clarity had finally arrived. Indifferent to status, immune to charm, and entirely uninterested in who felt embarrassed at a party. That was justice to me. Measured, impersonal, and durable, because it didn't restore my position by favor, but by principle. And it reminded everyone watching that rules matter most when powerful people forget them, especially inside companies built on trust and long memory. When the call finally came, it didn't sound like power anymore. She spoke first, voice unsteady, sentences tripping over each other. She said mistakes were made. She said emotions ran high. She said none of this was personal. Then the tone broke. She cried. Blamed pressure, blamed expectations, blamed everyone except the one decision that mattered. She asked me to come back, said the company needed me, said her husband was under scrutiny, said everything could be fixed if I helped smooth things over. I listened without interrupting. I didn't correct her version of events. I didn't remind her who ended my career over a perceived slight. Silence, does that work better than memory? When she finished, she waited for reassurance, for anger, for forgiveness. I gave her neither. I told her I would consider returning. Not as an employee, not as a favor, and not quietly. I said if I came back, it would be under conditions that protected the work, not the people attached to it. She agreed immediately, too quickly. My conditions were simple on paper. I would report directly to the board. All international decisions would bypass executive households entirely. No family member, spouse included, would attend briefings, access materials, or influence staffing. Violations would void my role instantly, with full transparency to partners. Everything in writing, no exceptions. She protested once, weakly, calling it excessive. I reminded her that excess was what brought us here. She fell silent, then agreed again, softer this time. I could hear the shift. Influence slipping feels different than losing status. It sounds like uncertainty. We met later in a neutral office. She avoided my eyes. Her apology arrived fragmented, unfinished, tangled in self-defense. I acknowledged it with a nod and nothing more. Apologies don't rebuild trust. Structures do. The papers were signed. Authority moved. Boundaries hardened. When I stood to leave, she asked whether this meant she was no longer involved. I said it meant she was no longer in the way. That was the moment power changed hands, not with shouting or threats, but with terms she couldn't negotiate without admitting how little leverage she had left. I walked out, knowing she would still be visible, still affluent, still married to the CEO, but influence is narrower than privilege, and hers had ended where mine resumed. Inside systems that measure contribution instead of proximity. She never raised her voice again. She didn't need to. She had finally learned the difference between being important and being irrelevant. That lesson lingered long after the meeting, settling quietly into every future decision I made, reminding me that leverage survives only when boundaries are enforced without apology. And no one forgets it. When I returned, it wasn't as an employee, but as a corrective measure. The board introduced me as an interim advisor, tasked with stabilizing international operations and rebuilding trust that had been quietly damaged. My title mattered less than my mandate: restore credibility, protect process, and move forward without spectacle. I accepted because the work was clean again. The negotiations restarted slowly. I reached out to the same partners, acknowledged the breakdown, and reframed the structure around accountability instead of personalities. They listened. This time, expectations were explicit. Authority was defined. Oversight was documented. I didn't promise fluency or charm. I promised execution. That was enough. Over weeks, terms improved, risk buffers expanded, numbers shifted. The final agreement exceeded the original proposal by margins no one mentioned publicly. It closed quietly, no gala, no stage, just signatures and follow-through. She was absent, not excluded dramatically, just removed entirely from any business function. Her access ended. Briefings continued without her. Decisions stopped passing through domestic channels. I didn't comment. Systems don't need commentary. The real change arrived later. A policy revision circulated, dry and precise. It formalized what had failed before: a prohibition on family interference in personnel or strategic decisions. Violations would trigger review, disclosure, and automatic recusal. Everyone signed. When the board asked for my input, I kept it minimal. Policies only work when they are boring. The office felt different, calmer, focused. People spoke carefully. I moved forward without needing to look back. Renewal isn't loud. It's structural. I didn't regain power. I rebuilt function. And in doing so, I finally understood that rebirth at work isn't about revenge, but about building something that no one person can ever bend again. That realization settled into my days, shaping how I hired, how I delegated, and how I listened. I chose transparency over speed, redundancy over brilliance, and documentation over memory. When conflicts surfaced, I routed them through process, not personalities. The company began to feel older in the best way, steadier, less impressed by titles. People noticed, partners stayed, new ones joined. What we built no longer depended on who someone knew at dinner. It depended on whether commitments survived pressure. I found satisfaction in that, not pride, just alignment. The absence of her influence became unremarkable, which was the point. When rules are clear, power stops wandering. I didn't need to be seen. The work spoke, steadily. Each completed milestone confirmed the same truth: quiet systems outlast loud people. That understanding marked the start of something new. Not because I returned, but because the company finally learned how to protect itself. From then on, rebuilding felt less like repair and more like forward motion. And permanent. When the promotion was announced, no applause followed. It didn't need to. The board framed it as continuity, a practical adjustment reflecting how the company now worked. I accepted calmly, aware that titles change behavior only when systems support them. This one did, deliberately, permanently, without noise or ceremony today. Reporting lines shifted quietly. People who once spoke over me now scheduled briefings and waited. There was no gloating in that reversal, only clarity. Authority felt different when it was procedural, not personal. Enforced by policy and expectation rather than proximity, the change lasted because it was designed carefully, intentionally. My work expanded without spectacle. I oversaw negotiations, approvals, and recovery plans, delegating decisively and documenting everything. Decisions moved through structure instead of personality. The company learned restraint. Problems were solved earlier, arguments softened, and outcomes stayed consistent across pressure and time. No one missed the chaos anymore at all. She faded from the conversation entirely, not banished, just irrelevant. Meetings proceeded without her presence or permission. Influence evaporated once access ended. Watching that happen taught me something simple. Power borrowed from relationships dissolves quickly when accountability enters the room. It leaves no trace behind over time ever again here. Justice arrived without speeches or apologies. It appeared as alignment between rules and outcomes. People adjusted. Incentives corrected themselves. I didn't win by defeating anyone. I won by refusing to perform and letting competence become visible under scrutiny. That clarity steadied everything that followed for the long term, quietly enduring. Those who once dismissed me now came prepared. Respect replaced assumption. I never mentioned the past. I didn't need to. The record spoke, and policy amplified it. That balance felt fair, sustainable, and earned through patience rather than force. It rewarded consistency and protected future decisions across teams, roles, companies. I learned the final lesson slowly and kept it. The most dangerous thing to underestimate is the person who never needed to announce their power. They build quietly, endure pressure, and let justice arrive on time. Without asking for permission, that truth carried me forward. Steady and whole, always onward. I didn't walk away from this story feeling victorious. I walked away feeling steady. What stayed with me wasn't the promotion or the reversal of power, but the quiet understanding that dignity doesn't need witnesses. When you choose to act with restraint, you don't erase the pain, you give it somewhere honest to go. I learned that patience isn't weakness, and silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's the longest form of strength. There were moments I wanted to explain myself, to defend what I had built, to demand fairness out loud. But real fairness doesn't respond to volume. It responds to consistency. When you keep doing the work the right way, even when no one is watching, the truth doesn't disappear. It waits. And when it arrives, it doesn't need decoration. If you stayed with me to the end, thank you. That means more than you know. I'd really love to hear your story. Have you ever been pushed aside for reasons that had nothing to do with your work? How did you handle it? And where are you listening from right now? If this story resonated, take a moment to leave a comment or share it with someone who might need to hear it today. A simple like helps more than it seems. And subscribing lets us keep telling stories about quiet strength, earned justice, and moments that change us without making a sound, 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 without making a sound,